Mr. O's Music.
Hello you lot, and welcome to Mr. O's Music. I'm Mr. O, and this is music I like. It's time this week for a classical album, and I want to look at a Tchaikovsky symphony. Now, for me, the sixth is easily his best, but it's a bit too much if you're not familiar with his other symphonies. It's very angst-filled and intense. Not surprising, given that it was the last thing he completed before he died of suspected suicide. The fourth symphony, however, is almost as good. It has bits that are an utter delight of light and jollity, and even the bits that aren't have an optimistic element. So, here we go. Tchaikovsky was a Russian composer of the mid-19th century, and his symphonies, particularly the last three of the six, are considered masterpieces. As well as having a keen sense of melody, Tchaikovsky loved to push at boundaries, be they key and tonality, meter, structure, or even use of the instrument. And this means that 150 years later, his music can still sound very fresh and has much to recommend it. Indeed, speaking of pushing at boundaries, one of the things that's most fascinating about this symphony is that Tchaikovsky is beginning to knock on the door of extended tonality. Up to this point in Western classical music, the relationship between keys has always been one of tonic to dominant, the circle of fifths. Here, however, while Tchaikovsky doesn't fully challenge that relationship, he does begin to experiment with the relationship of the third, and the relationship that keys only a third apart have to each other. The thing that's brilliant about it is that it's all going on effectively behind the scenes. I suspect very few people even realize it's happening when they listen to this symphony. Now, the recording I'll be using is that created as part of the complete recordings of Tchaikovsky's symphonies by Maris Janssens and the Oslo Philharmonic on Chandos in the mid-80s. Janssens died less than a year ago, and he was considered a superb interpreter of Tchaikovsky's works during his lifetime. The wonderful playing and stunning acoustics of this recording make the whole experience perfect. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's get to the music. The first movement should be in sonata form, which broadly means you get two groups of melodies, initially set up a fifth apart from each other, a muddle in the middle where the various melodies duke it out, and then a recap where you hear the melodies again, but now all in the home key. This movement is pretty much in sonata form, but as you'll see, there are some significant liberties taken. The work opens in F minor, with a strident one-note fanfare from the horns, with the trumpets then take up aggressively. After a few stops and starts, the orchestra calms, and the strings begin the main melody in a somewhat nervous, syncopated compound time waltz. The woodwind take over, and we build to a full orchestral reprise. Lower strings then begin what I would like to describe as an anti-melody. Where the main theme was all about the descending scale, this one rises, but it feels just as somber. This leads to another full orchestral reprise with wonderful French horn descending scales, now somehow transposed to A minor, which is not a key we should be in. We should really still be in the home key of F minor, or at the very least the dominant, but no, we're a third up instead, still playing the first subject. After a move back to F minor for a final go at the first subject material, we reach the first attempt at real second subject material, introduced by a tentative clarinet with upper woodwind punctuation. Again, the keys are confused. We should now either be in the dominant of C or the relative major of A flat major. Instead, we start in A flat minor, which is a third up again from the home key of F. The cellos play a lovely counter-melody, leading to a skipping motif from the strings with solo timpani accompaniment, which the woodwind take up more optimistically, the strings responding with hints of the first subject. But what key are we now in, you ask? Actually, I bet you didn't, but I'll tell you anyway. We're in B major, which happens enharmonically to be a minor third up from A flat, which was itself a minor third up from the home key of F. So this relationship of the thirds continues, now having led us to the key a tritone away from F minor, which in the traditional circle of fifths is the furthest away from F minor you can get. It's as if we were expecting to travel from London to Birmingham, but instead Tchaikovsky had said, but hold on, I've discovered this amazing technology that allows you to get to Sydney, Australia from London in only twice as long as it takes you to get from London to Birmingham. Now, your reaction would probably be, yeah, but I didn't really want to go to Sydney. I was hoping to go to Birmingham to see the bull ring firsthand. I hear it's really cool. Or actually, maybe this isn't quite such a good analogy. Anyway, We have no choice. We're on this journey now, and this melody gradually builds to a soaring climax played first by the strings and then the French horns, leading to an optimistic codetta, which keeps almost falling off the rails tonally before finding its place again. As the strings descend into the depths, the trumpets announce the fanfare from the opening again, and we're into the development section, with Tchaikovsky now finding himself in the perilous position of needing to get back to F minor for a recap from B major. If there's anything Tchaikovsky is supremely adept at, however, it's development sections, and he whirls us around once or twice with the various motifs and melodies swirling around each other. The strings gradually become more agitated as the trumpets keep trying to introduce the original sinister fanfare in various keys. The strings respond with more and more chromatic lines which seem to agitate the brass even further. After all this swirling around, we seem tonally lost, and Tchaikovsky reveals himself to have been the true magician of the hour, as, hey presto, we land in D minor, which isn't really where we wanted to be. It does have a certain logic, though, as it's both a third up from B minor, which is where we started the development section, and also a third away from F minor in the other direction, below F rather than above. At this point, from the depths, the original theme emerges, crying from the violins. Suddenly, it all calms, and we find ourselves somewhat unexpectedly at the beginning of the second subject material. Tchaikovsky then reveals his master plan, because the second half of this material, with the rocking timpani, went up a third in the exposition. By doing this again in the recap, we now end up back in F major, which, okay, it's not F minor, but you know, it's close. After a lovely calm repeat of this material, the energy returns with the codetta again, and a sudden interruption from the trumpets with their favourite fanfare, which pushes us back into F minor. The rest of the orchestra let the trumpets blow themselves out, and the strings and woodwind then return with a lovely skipping coda, which the brass enthusiastically add the fanfare to. We reach F minor triumphantly! End of movement. The second movement begins with a beautiful lament in B flat minor from the oboe accompanied by the strings. The strings then respond with a unison scale-based melody which builds up and up, modulating a minor third every 2 bars, there's that interval again, to a loud climax which then falls away, leaving the lower strings to remind us of the original theme, while others dot about playing accompanying scales. After another rising scale response, the woodwind introduce a new melody that seems to invoke something Elgar-like in F major, but it quickly dissipates, which it absolutely wouldn't in the hands of Elgar, let's be honest. The strings build to another rendition of the main melody, now with trumpet and horns accompanying, still in F major, which is a sort of logical key as it's the dominant of B flat minor, which was where we started. After taking us off in a slightly different direction with the unison melody, we return once more to the somber first tune in B flat minor via D flat major, which really is not the way this is meant to work, until you realize that of course D flat major is a third down from F, and another third down gets you to B flat. The melody now has chromatic burbles from the woodwind playing around the beautiful lament. After the unison scale melody, this time a lone clarinet interrupts and leads to a contemplative moment from the woodwind, which the strings join in before they begin to lead the cello through keys, descending a minor third each time, thirds, mirroring those thirds we had rising earlier on. The bassoon concludes with a beautiful full rendition of the melody with a final coda where the minor third is again outlined with a querying Italian sixth built on the minor third of the tonic being sounded. I know that's really complicated. Okay, but now this is where the fun really starts, because up to this point it's been a great symphony. Clever and engaging music, lots of lovely key tunes, discombobulating keys, but now this is when Tchaik really starts to show us what he's capable of. Strings normally play their instruments with the bow. While they can pluck the strings, it's normally reserved for special effects. In the second half of the 19th century, however, this began to change. Johann Strauss wrote the Pizzicato polka in 1869, which is entirely pizzicato, and both Grieg's and Nitra's dance from Peer Gynt, written in 1874, and Delibes' Divertissement from his ballet Sylvia in 1876 use an awful lot of pizzicato. Tchaikovsky, writing this in 1870, the same decade as these works, clearly wanted to get in on this act. And did he ever? This movement opens with an immense quiet energy in F major as the whole string section play a wonderful melody full of push and pull in the dynamics, offbeat accompaniment, figuration galore, and wonderful handoffs between instruments which, believe me, are visually as exciting to watch live as they are to listen to. Just as they seem ready to finish, a lone oboe interrupts the fun and the strings hand over to the woodwind, who play a jolly tune in A major, which is a major third up from the home key of F. Again, just as they are about to conclude, the brass and timpani take over with a jolly bouncy melody in D flat major, which is a major third down from the home key of F major. As they continue to play, the woodwind get in on the act with the piccolo playing so fast it sounds like he's just sneezed. So we've now had 3 tunes introduced in short succession with apparently no real traditional relationship between the keys: F, A, and D flat. The woodwind gradually steer the brass towards F major and the original theme. The strings gratefully take over and return us to this first theme. An almost precise repeat of the first material is interrupted towards the end as the woodwind clearly think it needs some spicing up, and so they join in. This upsets the strings, who respond with their tune, but now in the brass key of D flat major. The woodwind have a second go, but having received the same response for the strings, they decide to have a third go in their home key of A major, which is a third higher. This has the desired effect, pulling the strings up a third also to their home key of F major, and the woodwind, clearly rather pleased with themselves, join in, and for a few bars all seems well. Until, of course, the brass decide that they need to have their say. They join in with their tune in D flat, and the woodwind and strings together rather reasonably seem to accept that, oops, we'd forgotten about the brass, and so rather than fighting them, they reply with the brass tune in D flat also. The brass generously seem to accept this apology and reply in F major. Everyone ends happily and quietly in the home key. Job done. So then, having settled their differences, a huge firework display of a finale begins with scattered unison scales from the outset in F major. After this rambunctious beginning, we switch swiftly to A minor, a third up from F, with nervous woodwind chattering what will become our main second theme, and the strings doing nothing to calm them as the music builds to another iteration of the main theme back in F, leading to a galloping conclusion, and then suddenly, it's all over. The second melody we heard a moment ago in A minor is now introduced quietly by the double reeds, with triangle in B flat minor. As this builds through the French horns, it becomes more sinister, and then the trombones get a hold of it, setting the violins into a frenzy. The double reeds try to calm it back down, pushing us a third lower into G flat major, but the strings are really quite agitated and the trumpets sure aren't helping. Before we know it, the agitation becomes more optimistic, and through various twists and turns, we're back into the first theme in the home key of F. The strings then have another go at the second, slower theme, now more sentimentally in D minor, being a third below F, with the flute providing somewhat nervous counter melodies. As this inevitably builds, the lower brass start up and the trumpets join, leading us to a rising chromatic passage which concludes with a reminder of the unison fanfare from the first movement in the original key of F minor. Thankfully, it calms, and we are released into a very optimistic coda in the major, introduced by the horns with an increasingly loud dominant pedal in the timpani and lower strings. And this use of the dominant pedal at this point demonstrates perhaps an acceptance that the tonic-dominant relationship is still king, even if Tchaik's quite adept at messing with it. A triumphant return to the original fireworks follows with repeated triplet chords from the brass. Everyone gets a bit too excited and it almost goes off the rails both harmonically and rhythmically, but they all manage to hold it together, and in the final coda the most exciting thing happens, with the bass instruments outlining an F major chord, then an A major chord, then a D flat major chord, before crunching back down onto F again. It's a wonderful way of resolving all that unresolved clashing thirds tension, and in particular referencing the arguments from the third movement, as if they're all saying, yeah, this modulation by a third thing, we're cool with this. Unlike some of Beethoven's symphonies, this doesn't outstay its welcome, and Janssens pushes forwards at the end, going faster and faster, making it even more exciting. I said at the beginning that this wasn't my favourite Tchaikovsky, but it was the first one I ever encountered, and it's an absolutely wonderful bit of writing. The novelty of the key structures and thirds, the third and fourth movements in particular, it's just great fun, and I can't see how anyone could not like this piece, or this recording. Go listen now. But before that, thanks for watching. Do please subscribe, comment, click the bell. It's the best way to know when the next video arrives and to encourage me to make it. And until then, see you next time.
Mr.